Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. Ruth is a visiting professor at a large university in Ireland, and Claire is an associate professor at a primarily undergraduate university in Northern California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss.
Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Ruth.
And I'm Claire, and today we're talking about coming back to the classroom, physically. But first, Ruth, how was your week?
My week was really good. It was a little weird because our stuff finally arrived from America, like the stuff that we shipped.
Like
Have
6
I told
months
you this?
later?
I know. So it's like officially 3 months late.
Wow.
But
Okay,
it was
3 months.
It was like, I mean, it was still a long time since we left, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and it was funny because I told the girls, like, our stuff is coming, and they were like, you said that to us a lot, like, we don't believe you anymore. And I was like, I know, it's not me lying, it was the people. But it's just very weird. It's a weird time capsule, you know, of, like, the stuff that seemed crucial then, you know what I mean? And the stuff that we left behind, you're like, what was the thought process there? But it's super cool. It's fun. I finally have a hat and a scarf.
Oh!
Which I'm very excited about because it's freezing here. So, yeah, I don't... Again, even if it had arrived when it was meant to, I still don't know why I was so delusional that I wasn't going to need a coat or anything. But yes, so definitely very exciting. Some of it's a little overwhelming because you're like... But, like, the house is completely full and now we have all this stuff coming in. So how's that going to work? So that's a lot. But, yeah. Luckily, it's in a storage unit, so it can be gently.
That's good.
Yeah. But tell me, how was your week?
Oh, my week was good. I'm excited because we have this new organic carbon analyzer on campus.
Ooh.
And I haven't used it before, but I'm using it next week. I got trained on it last week. And I'm just really, it's so cool because it doesn't involve, it's an instrument that I can use and get data right on campus. Like, I'm expecting that on Thursday we're going to set up a bunch of samples and then we're going to get a bunch of data, and by Friday I'll have a bunch of data, which is just so...
It's not the
I
norm,
love how speedy
right?
it is.
Yeah.
And then I'm also building this instrument that I've mentioned on here a couple times, the flow injection analysis system, which is also for measuring iron in seawater and getting the data straight away. And I guess I'm just contrasting it with my normal method, which involves getting a lot of stuff ready with all the samples before we go to Santa Cruz and then analyze it on the instrument. And the thing about that is just, I don't know if something's going wrong until we finish everything and get to Santa Cruz. But here you get to watch the data coming off the instrument and be like, oh, it's looking good. Or, oh, there's a problem. Let me work on that problem. So I'm really excited about that.
That's cool. So is this going to negate the need to go to Santa Cruz, or is it just like...
Not quite. When I go to Santa Cruz, I measure iron and a bunch of other metals. And so here I can measure iron. So anytime I just need to measure iron, that totally negates the need to go to Santa Cruz. But if I want to measure some other metal, I don't currently have a system for that yet.
But that's cool on many levels, right? Because I guess students will get to do it.
Exactly.
And so that's super cool.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
I'm really into it. Thanks.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of fun.
Very cool. So do you have a quote for us this week?
I do, and it's again from the 4 Agreements book, so there's 4 agreements in this book, and last time I mentioned the one about doing your best. This agreement is about not taking things personally, and it's just, I feel like this really resonates with me.
Hit me with it, yeah.
I even have a little sticky note on my wall from this that says, don't take anything personally, even compliments. That's the part.
Oh, man.
Because if you're taking the compliments personally, then you'll take them, so anyway, here's a little quote. If someone gives you an opinion and says, hey, you look fat, don't take it personally, because the truth is that this person is dealing with his or her own feelings, beliefs, and opinions. That person tried to send poison to you, and if you take it personally, then you take that poison and it becomes yours. And then a little bit later he says, if you do not take it personally, you are immune in the middle of hell. Immunity to poison in the middle of hell is the gift of this agreement. So, I feel like all the time I can use that reminder.
Well, yeah, and I think, someone in grad school, I had this very amazing advisor, and she told me this, like, just don't, like, praise or criticism. Take it all with a pinch of salt, because, like, I don't know, people have their own agendas, there's their own weird stuff going on, and, like, this
really,
person...
it says more about the person saying the thing than it does about you. And you need to decide whether it makes sense or not to you.
Right. And then even what they say, like, does it have to be? Do you know what I mean? Like, you're giving the weight to the words. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like if somebody insults you about something that you feel like that doesn't even make sense, it doesn't mean anything. You're like, oh, that doesn't make sense. What a weird thing for them to say, you know? So
I've had it a few times with my daughter where someone will say something to her and you're like, but do you even care that they think that? And she's like, no, like I'm fine with that, but like it's the fact they were trying to be mean, you know what I mean?
Yes,
and it's like,
sure.
But still, I mean, yeah, it's just...
But still, that says something more about that person. Like what's going on in their lives? Why do they feel the need to be mean, you know?
Right, and the thing I think my biggest issue with all of most of my issues stem back to like chasing the praise. Do you know what I mean? And wanting to be a people pleaser. And that's really difficult. But like to give that up because...
I know.
Then, yeah, you're not doing what you need to do. And actually, it's kind of relevant for all the stuff we're talking about.
It is.
So, yeah.
So what are we talking about today, Ruth?
So today we're talking about getting back physically into the classroom. And it's kind of a follow-on or further thoughts from a previous episode we did where we talked about us going back to work in person.
Interacting with
and
colleagues,
Yeah, but this time it's more about students coming back to the classroom. And kind of... Again, I just shared with you on here that there's an outbreak in my daughter's class, so maybe this is too soon to say coming slightly out of the pandemic, but you know what I mean? Like, even if we're not, like, things are different now. Do you know what I mean? And so, yeah, kind of adjusting to that with students.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So do you have... My working is very short, but do you have what's working for you in this?
Yeah, well, yeah. So from my perspective, I've been teaching labs face-to-face through the whole pandemic, but this is the first semester that I'm also teaching lectures face-to-face. And it's just so great to have more interaction with the students and to see their faces. Like, first of all, I just feel like we know each other better and they can ask more questions and we can have more of a back and forth. And they have a better understanding of how everybody's doing in the class. Like, wait, do a lot of people not understand this? Let's talk about this more. I just feel like that works better. And then just, I don't know. I mean, we talk about this all the time. But now I'm able to see their faces and see, are they nodding? Are their eyes falling asleep? Are their eyebrows furrowed because they're confused? Like, what's going on? How do I respond? And that's just really wonderful. And then also the casual interactions. Like just the other day, I was just moving this instrument around and I happened to be in a room where some students were and they were like, what was your favorite class in college, Claire? And we had a lovely conversation and it turned out we had a lot of things in common about like our trajectory of deciding what areas of study we were interested in. That wouldn't happen on Zoom, you know?
No,
so,
totally.
Yeah, that was just really nice.
I know, and it's so many of those things are just intangible things. But like when it's happening, you're like, this didn't happen on Zoom. Like it's like you wouldn't even know to list those things as being things you were missing. But yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, like it turned out this student had had a similar trajectory as I had with like biology, environmental science, and finally landing on chemistry. And she was like, I thought I was really weird. That's so cool that you did it too. No. So, you know, like that just turned out to be, who would have thought that that would be meaningful, you know? But it turned out to be.
Totally.
Yeah.
Love it.
So what about you? What's your short working?
Well, I mean, I think in terms of like holding students like, no, we're doing this, like this is happening. Like for me, it's just structurally happening at the university I'm at, that they're very like, we're in person, the end. Do you know what I mean? And obviously people have to miss stuff, but it's a little bit, I think I mentioned on here, like there is kind of expectations about like having documentation.
Okay.
That you did get a COVID test if you are saying you can't come to class. You know what I mean? And so it's definitely, that's helpful in terms of holding the boundary of like, we're doing this in person. And then for me, so last semester I was teaching a lab in person and like it took a bit for me to get over my anxiety, but once I did, it's just so good. I love the chats and eavesdropping on people and, you know, that's again, back to my favorite theme. And then I'm teaching this strange course this semester, which is like, is hybrid because it's for people who have full-time jobs. So we do meet on Zoom. It's pre-recorded lectures. But for a couple of Saturdays in the semester, they have to come to a full day of labs on campus. And we had that, and it was like genuinely such a buzz. Like they were like, and everybody, including me, was like, oh God, I can't believe we have to go do this thing. But then just being there and seeing the connections that were happening.
Oh.
Someone was freaking out about the homework and asking me about it. And then someone else was like, oh, no, I know how to do that. Like it was something about the homework system or whatever.
Oh.
And I was just like, oh, hallelujah. Like this is, you know, because I'm still in that position where these people, especially up till then, didn't know each other. So they're all, you know, when you just have that same question coming in 10 times. And even though you put an announcement on the student interface thing, it doesn't matter. You still get the questions. And so I'm hoping now they'll have a little bit more support because they kind of connected with each other.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah, it's it's energizing for me to need to be around that. And so just so, like, very tired afterwards, but such a different kind of tired than after a Zoom class.
Oh, I totally agree. I was just thinking, whenever because I have lecture at 8 in the mornings this semester, and sometimes I'm like, oh gosh, 8 in the morning, I have to rush to 8 in the, but after lecture, I'm always like, wow, it was so fun to have a lecture face to face, you know, and like, it is energizing to actually interact with these people. Totally. I love that. That's so cool because I can imagine a full day on a Saturday, like that seems like such a big thing to have to add to your schedule, but then it was really fun and everybody met each other, and that's wonderful.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's important. This is sort of the working on as well, but like holding the boundaries around, no, you have to do this thing. And then people might be annoyed about it, but then when they actually do it, they're like, this is better. Okay, great. And
totally.
I think that's the working on stuff. So I'll come to that in a minute. But, okay. Yeah. So
and that makes sense. I love that you're appreciating that the university is holding some of that boundary.
Totally.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Because, anyway, getting into the other stuff. So tell me, what are you working on?
Well, I'm also working on reestablishing classroom norms. Yes. And I had this whole moment where early in, second week of the semester, a student had to miss lab. And the question was, can we set up a Zoom thing for the person to Zoom into lab? And so then I was thinking it through, and the interesting thing is, we can. I have an iPad with a stand that I've been using for virtual students in the lab. We have a system, the students are used to it. It is doable. However, it's so much worse than actually attending lab that I don't want it to be possibly construed as a substitute for attending lab, you know? And so I decided that even though we could, and even though that would be better than missing lab, and in this case it's a question of zooming in or just missing lab, I decided the answer was no, because I just wanted it to be 100% clear that this person has missed lab, and that Zoom is not a substitute for lab. We have been doing that in the past out of necessity, but it's not actually a substitute. And so I just wanted it to be clear to this student, but also to set the standard in the class that that's not a substitute. That's not what we're doing.
Well, dude, because the downside of them connecting is if you did do it, everyone would know. I mean, they obviously would because they would see it. But then it would be like, oh, it's a thing we can do.
Right. I did not want it to be a thing that we could do. So I said no. And a couple other students have had to miss lab. You know, of course, we have to be more flexible about people missing things when they might have COVID. But I'm being flexible in the sense of you can get the data from your classmates, and not flexible in you can zoom in. Because, again, I just want it to be no question that lab was missed and needs to be, that, and then you're going to have to work to make sure you still understand that content. And I just want that to be crystal clear.
And we did have on the lab day, and they're because they're so few and far between, some people Zoomed into the lab and they had COVID, so they had to. Right. But then afterwards they were like, oh, I couldn't see, you need to make a video for this, or that experiment, it needs bigger. And it's like, no. This was not, it's not meant to be done on Zoom. We're not changing anything. It was just a one-off thing. And it was completely inferior, do you know? And it just wasn't, I think you're dead. I think it would have been better to say, you just aren't here today. You know what I mean? But just half in, half out, it was just not ideal at all.
Totally.
Yeah.
Like again, when the student has to miss the whole semester and we're going to come up with some substitute, and that's what we've been doing in the past few semesters. Okay, yes. Better to zoom in than not to zoom in. But yeah, it's just not. That's a whole different thing, and we've kind of addressed this the whole pandemic, that developing something that works online is just a whole different thing than something that works face to face. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I love that though. And I think that, so I'm going to just hijack and go on. But
yeah, go for it.
But yeah, I literally have written down here the sense that because we did it before, we can do it again. And it's like, and it's a hard conversation to have because, before there was sort of the implication that there was barriers to all of these accommodations. And now it's clear that, yes, you could do it, but it isn't. And I don't want to do it because...
We've all learned how to do it.
Right.
So technically we can do it. But do we want to for the class? Yeah.
And then there's also... so there is just being present for labs and those things, but also the extreme flexibility that we had of handing stuff in whenever and all of those things. It's really difficult to row that back now, even though these aren't students that I had last semester. So it's not you know what I mean? But there's just this different expectation in the world of accommodating things, and it's difficult to kind of hold that and say no. And I think... It's funny, I could see in some of the students my crummy attitude, which is just this whole idea of how can you boil down everything you need to do to the bare constituent parts? Is that the word? Anyway, but you know what I mean? And it's just I've gotten into that from necessity and stress and not having enough time to being just give me the highlights. I don't really need, you know what I mean? And that's been my whole vibe. And I can see it with the students, and the first week we had one group come for labs and they refused. They would not take a break. They would not take a break. They were not still engaging with the material in the same way.
So they were trying to power through past the point that they could power through.
Yeah. And
I understand that, sure.
Totally. And they're just no, we have to get out of here. But so the second week then we enforced a break and we enforced the expectation that you're going to be here till this time to kind of deal with that, because then again, it's the thing of minimizing everything down to what's absolutely necessary. But then there is an element of, okay, but you're here now, so why don't you get the best out of it? Do you know what I mean? And
sure.
Definitely, I mean, I've been like that when I was grumpy and stressed when you go to workshops or conferences and you're is it necessary to have this many breaks and do we really have to chat and socialize? But then when you do it and just relax into it, it's great. Yeah. And that's when lots of great things happen. Or even me going in to do that lab experiment and being if I was at home I could get this done in 40 minutes, and then I totally couldn't, and I didn't have the other interaction. So
right.
I think kind of enforcing some stuff to set those expectations of, sure, sometimes in the depths of the pandemic when you were super busy and had children in your house and all that stuff, we changed things so you could do the bare minimum, but now we can't do that anymore. And then things I mean, it's ridiculous to pretend that we couldn't always have flexible deadlines we always could, right? But somehow it's that wall got broken, and now it's
did.
I had this, and just to be you did with that, maybe that's all it takes is one time having the awkward no, you have to come to the lab, that's what you need to do. But it's tricky. It's tricky.
It's so interesting because this has reminded me of something we've talked about before, just in the context of our classes, and you set the expectations early in the semester, and it's hard to change those expectations.
Totally.
And similarly, if you had the, students in part 1 of the class and now you're in part 2 of the class, they know how the class works and how you work, and it's hard to change it at that point. And but to do it, you have to establish the norms and be this is how it is, and hold firm for a little while, and then everybody knows the new expectations. And I feel we're kind of just seeing a expanded version of that, where you didn't have these particular students last semester, but we all had the flexible pandemic thing last semester, and the semester before, and the semester before. And so now we do need to hold the line for a little bit to get back to where we actually want to be.
Totally. And I think it's sort of so weird because at the beginning of the pandemic, in some ways it was liberating to be like, whoa, wow, like maybe we don't need all these. And then you see that you did need them,
Right.
you know, and it was important. And like a colleague of mine is struggling with lack of attendance, you know, and I think it's just like they don't know the benefit of coming in. So I wonder, do you have to be stricter about some things to kind of reestablish that? To make it,
or at least explicit, you know, like I think, they, just like we said, oh, maybe we don't need firm deadlines. They said, oh, maybe I don't need to go to class. Perfectly reasonable thought.
Yeah.
And now we're saying, oh, wait, no. Actually, it's important to have the stricter deadlines. Actually, it's important to come to class. So we just need to help them realize that, because of course they don't know at this point, or some of them don't, you know?
Right. And like if I have a choice of getting out of stretchy pants, you know what I mean? Like I always will not choose it. But then when I've had to do it, you're like, oh, this is better. Like I guess we just have to do that with them. But I think it is sort of grim to see it just, and I think these students are very, very busy, but how much they want everything just boiled down to like only things that are absolutely necessary. And it's it just doesn't work like that at all. So yeah.
That's interesting. I was thinking about your students because it's interesting to be... so you're teaching high school teachers,
yes.
right? So they have kind of an interesting... I hadn't really thought about both sides of this. They're experienced in teaching. So that's one side that's kind of interesting. We don't normally teach people who've done a lot of teaching. But on the other hand, they're really experienced in high school, and you're kind of teaching them about college stuff. So that's a little bit different. So... on the one hand, they seem very experienced in what you're doing, but on the other hand, they're very experienced in something slightly different. And I just think that's kind of an interesting challenge of a student group to teach.
It is. I feel like we could have a whole episode on it.
Yeah, we should. That's a great idea.
Well, it's very interesting in Ireland because we have this state exam, right? And in some ways, it's really beneficial because you know when students come into the university, whatever kind of level they were taught to, you know they have heard of these things. Do you know what I mean? So like if someone has gotten a certain grade in a certain level of maths, you know they know exactly what sines and cosines. You know what I mean? So you have all of that. Yeah. And so if someone wants to do a physics course, they have to have a certain level of maths and they have to have a certain, you know, I think they have to have physics often. And that's why this course is really good because lots of schools don't have physics teachers.
I see.
So they're not, you know, and so it kind of cuts people off from that option earlier on. So it is really great in some ways. However, the test, obviously a lot of people, and when I was in school, I was like, is this on the test? Is this on the test? Is this on the test? If not, I don't even want to hear about it. And even to the point that if something came up the year before, you would kind of do the statistical analysis of whether it was going to come up again and maybe
you're like,
not
well,
even
probably
study
not
it.
again this year, so I don't need... Interesting.
There's a whole art form in predicting what's coming up and like, you know, it's a whole thing. So, yeah, and I think it's something that like university professors here get frustrated with because then students come in and they're like, is this on the test? And like, but we create that system because we make them do that to get into the university. So anyway... it's complicated.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's so weird. It really, yeah. So it's interesting. And then, of course, these teachers are working like full-time jobs.
Sure. So, that's another big variable. Yeah.
Right. But then again, it's like you said, like giving up a Saturday is really difficult. But then you may as well just make the best of it while you're there. Do you know what I mean? And so...
Sure. And it makes sense to me, of course. You know, everybody... yeah, giving up a Saturday is a big deal, maybe in particular if you're working full-time or on top of whatever else you're doing. And so, yeah, and then when we have not had as much experience in the classroom and maybe we've forgotten some of the benefits of those in-person things, it takes some reminders, like we've been talking about, of, oh, wow, this is actually useful. Who knew that random chat is actually really meaningful and we need that, you know? So,
and why don't I know that? Like, chat is my whole jam, do you know what I mean? But I think I told you I gave a seminar a few weeks ago and I was trying to weasel out of it being in person. Do you know what I mean? I was like, and then the guy was like, I think if I'd really thrown down, he would have been like, fine. But he was like, you know, I think it'd be better if you came in. And then I came in and did it, and it was so much better. Because people were nodding and smiling at me and whatever. Maybe they're like often just being polite, but who cares? It made me feel like I was having a conversation and not just, So I think it's good, but I think the thing I'm running into, and it's useful to have this conversation with you and sort of for you to articulate the same things, but like, it is okay to say no to things. Just because you could physically do a thing doesn't mean you have to do the thing.
And I also think sometimes the students will say, hey, could I do it on Zoom? Kind of trying to be proactive, you know, like instead of missing it fully, could I do it this substitute? And so so they're trying to be proactive. So it's not like they desperately want to do it on Zoom necessarily. It's that they're trying to be as proactive as they can. And so that's great, but this is not. So it's just redirecting that proactiveness towards the way that it would be more useful.
Yeah, totally. And like, I think, again, like, you know, in the beginning of the pandemic, it was like, ooh, could we do this forever and have hybrid? And, you know, and I think the answer is no. Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, mine is naturally hybrid, but I think the flexibility of, I remember I often had students who were in the store coming to class. You're like, this is not okay. Like, this is not, I know you think you can, just because you can physically do this, it doesn't mean you're actually attending class. Like, so, I think it feeds into a lot of delusions. For me as well. Like,
me too.
I had to learn I can't email and give the kids lunch, apparently, at the same time. Because it always went badly.
Seems like you might be able to. You've got a free hand. No
Totally.
problem,
and I did try it many times, but it was not optimal.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's going to take a while to get back. And then, of course, even if factually COVID had vanished and there was no more isolation, like, it would still take a while to get used to it. But then it is trickling on and there is stuff still happening. And
but I am really appreciating how, as we do go back, we quickly see these benefits that we had forgotten or not realized how important they were. They're there. Practically immediately we say, oh, right, this is valuable. So that's exciting.
So, you know, I used to do this crafternoon thing.
And that was a club.
Yeah, where we would meet and chat and knit or sew or whatever. And, you know, it was super lovely. But, like, again, I kind of, like, sometimes I would think about it, like, what was I doing in the middle of a work week just sitting around shooting the breeze with people? Like, what was that about? And then a photo, you know the way Google on your phone will be like, this day, X amount of years ago or whatever. That happened and I was like, oh my God, that looks amazing. It just looks so good and like so fun and so many good things came out of it. Do you know what I mean? But I think I mentally just had to get so, like, what's the word? I don't even know what the word is, but just very serious about my time. You know what I mean? So it's kind of, it would be good to get back into that. Totally. Where you can let those things unfold without a super strict agenda. So,
and remember that things like Crafternoon and taking that time is very valuable and not just a frivolous use of time or whatever.
Totally. Yeah. Totally. Well, thanks so much, Claire. I feel like this is going to be one of those ongoing things for sure. We'll come back to it.
Thanks, Ruth.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people you know if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us and we'll see you next time.